The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the BITO Small Business Vouchers Overview webinar. We'll give a few minutes for people to continue to connect into this webinar. We're still just going to wait a few more minutes for people to join, and then we'll start in a few minutes. And we'll get started in about a minute or so now. Okay, it's about 5 after the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the BITO Small Business Vouchers Overview. We're just going to give so the purpose of this webinar is to just give a very high-level overview of the Bioenergy Technologies Office and its participation in the Small Business Vouchers Pilot Program, the round 3 that is currently live right now. It opened earlier this last week and is open until November 10th. The purpose is to address BITO-specific questions, and we'll be taking questions and answers at the end of this webinar. I just wanted to highlight that any logistic, procedural, process, or general questions that pertain beyond BITO will be addressed by an upcoming SBV webinar, which will be held next Tuesday, October 25th. And you can go ahead and see that, you can go ahead and register for that on the SBV website. What we really want to do today is just address any BITO-specific questions that have arisen. This is the third round of BITO's participation in the Small Business Voucher Program, and so we wanted to have this opportunity to give folks a chance to hear and for us to hear some more specific questions that they have about the program. But really, you know, any overarching SBV-wide questions should really be addressed next week. So again, the purpose of the Small Business Program, as many of you are aware, since you're on this call, is the purpose of this program is to help, is to create a program to help small businesses bring clean energy technologies to market faster by enabling access to national lab expertise and tools easily and affordably. And this is a pilot program. Last year was the first year we ran this program at the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. And the purpose was to match clean energy small businesses with experts from national labs and to give them vouchers valued at amounts of $50,000 to up to $300,000 that they can use at the national labs for technical assistance. And again, this is a pilot program that we ran in FY16. There were 2 rounds, and we're continuing the program. We're continuing to tweak the program coming into FY17. And of course, this is the first round that we'll be running this year. There are 5 lead national laboratories that have been chosen to help administer and run the program. They are Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and Sandia National Laboratory. Of course, all of DOE national laboratories are eligible to participate. Now, the Bioenergy Technologies Office typically coordinates with 8 of these national laboratories, and they are listed on the website. But point of clarification is that, you know, really all DOE national laboratories are eligible to participate for BITO related projects, and so I wanted to make that point clear. Just to give you an idea of what we've funded in the past, and this is on the SBV website as well as in news blasts on the BITO website, is we've made 7 awards in the last year, and I've highlighted those companies in front of you there. Just wanted to point out that there are multiple cases where a company has been able to work with multiple labs to solve, where they've gone to 2 different labs for their specific capabilities at each of those different labs. It's not a requirement, but just wanted to point out that is something that is eligible and possible in this program. Again, not a requirement. So again, the purpose of this webinar is to really just give an overview of BITO and how it pertains to SBV. Any really kind of SBV specific questions will be handled next week. The vision of the Bioenergy Technologies Office is to create a thriving and sustainable bioeconomy fueled by innovative technologies. So, you know, one thing that we're definitely looking for and competitive requests for applications is the innovation in the application. So I wanted to highlight that aspect of it. The mission of our office is to develop and demonstrate transformative and revolutionary bioenergy technologies for a sustainable nation. And we have a number of performance goals for our office. But again, one of the purposes of the SBV program is to align the national lab capabilities with the specific challenges of a small business, and hopefully that they are in alignment with the BETO mission, vision, and performance goals. So I wanted to highlight some of the core focus areas that BETO is engaged in and for which we provide funding for, and for which are the areas of which small business voucher applications are eligible. So, we do a tremendous amount of program portfolio management, but really the core of what we fund and of what is eligible for the SBV program are in these 6 buckets below: in feedstock, supply and logistics, conversion R&D, demonstration and market transformation, sustainability, strategic analysis, and strategic communications. And I've just highlighted some of the major areas within each of those 6 buckets. So within feedstock supply, anything R&D related to terrestrial feedstocks, to advanced algal systems, supply, production, and logistics of those feedstocks, either at the feedstock location or at the biorefinery. And then within conversion R&D, a primary focus on deconstruction and fractionation of the feedstock, and then that leads to further synthesis and upgrading into intermediates and final products. There's also a component that's looking at larger scale and deployment issues, and those are challenges associated with the demonstration and the market transformation, where we're looking at more integrated solutions and looking at the distribution infrastructure of the biofuels and bioproducts. There are also cross-cutting issues, looking at sustainability, strategic analysis, and strategic communications are also eligible in this solicitation. So a critical question that we often get asked is, what is the scope, what is the priority of BETO's funding? And here I wanted to highlight the multi-year program plan, which articulates BETO's mission that I just sort of highlighted, but with much greater granularity and specificity. And here this is a large document that really describes with specificity our mission and goals, both for internal stakeholders as well as external stakeholders, such as those on this webinar. And it's really a guide that really describes how our office operates and how we coordinate activities. And it really highlights some of the how we think about planning mid-year and longer-term programs. And along the way, these have been informed by numerous stakeholder interactions, workshops, requests for information. So this is a living, breathing document that has been informed by stakeholders at just about every step of the process. And we regularly update this and get feedback along the way. So just just wanted to highlight that we recently updated the multi-year program plan in March of 2016, and I've provided the link to that multi-year program plan in the text box below. The MYTP is also available on our website. So in sum, the focus of the program is really to improve and accelerate the commercialization of first-of-a-kind technologies to utilize the nation's abundant biomass resources for the production of advanced biofuels and bio-based products. Again, with concerted focuses on terrestrial feedstock and supply, including algal feedstocks, and on conversion R&D, and as well as integrating at larger scale in demonstration and market transformation. And I've just highlighted a few of the challenges and the opportunities, again, that have been formed by a number of stakeholders. This is not an exhaustive list. Certainly there are many other challenges that are associated with this. This is a very high-level overview of some of the challenges, and just wanted to point out again that the purpose of this Small Business Voucher Program is to align the challenges that you small businesses have and try to link it to capabilities at national laboratories. These are just some of the challenges that we've seen, and hopefully we can provide funding to address some of the concerns that you have in these areas. So with that, so really at this point, you know, I'd like to take questions and just again highlight that there are these are the websites for where you can contact folks. So at this point, I'll be reading out some of the questions and answers, and if we don't get to them, if we don't get to your particular question and answer today, we will try to create some facts, frequently asked questions that arose from this webinar, and post this on our website. So I'll just give a few minutes so that people can start to populate questions in the chat box. So one of the questions that came through was the first two rounds focused on biofuel production versus biopower. Do you foresee any future SD funding for projects that focus on biopower and not biofuel production? So one thing that I was remiss in communicating was that this is a competitive program. We received a number of applications in the last round. The success rate was low just because of the sheer number of applications. Biopower is something that this office is looking at. However, it is somewhat commercially practiced. So one of the challenges that I think an RFA in this area has is really more delineating what the specific challenge is and aligning it with what a lab capability is. So, you know, biopower is not a priori excluded, but you know, highlighting what the lab capability is in relation to the problem that your company is facing is really a challenge. And again, it could still be a very well-regarded application, but this is a highly competitive program for funding, and so it just, the first 2 rounds probably just reflected, quite frankly, high degree of technical merit. Not to say that the projects that were not selected did not have merit, but there's just a limited number of applications that we can fund, and so that's why you see what you saw. But just sort of in a nutshell, biopower is not a priori excluded. The next question was that our technology creates a bioproduct called biochar. Do you foresee any future SEC funding for projects that do not create a biochemical co-product? Biochemicals seem to be the focus of the first 2 rounds. Again, biochar is not excluded. It's just a matter of, is this, again, the key part of a competitive RFA is a very concise and clear description of the specific problem and the and how a lab capability can fit into that, can address that problem. Another question was, is there a website or mechanism in place to try to match company needs with national lab expertise? That's a great question, and that's probably, again, this is a pilot program, so that's something that we'll probably be trying to develop in the future. There is a website for, there is a contact person associated for specific questions like this, and one of the things that we're looking for in the first round is to identify, what is to identify is the lab capability. Is the lab selected the right the right lab for the specific challenge? So that's a very case-dependent question, and unfortunately, that's something you're going to have to follow up with the. If you go to the sdv.org website and you go to the contacts information, there is a lab liaison to help guide you through that. Another question is, can funds be used to scale up a technology that has been proven through an SBIR grant? Again, if the problem is defined and it links to a lab capability, and there's merit to this, that would be eligible. Again, this is a pretty open, we've kept this pretty open. We're trying to make this, trying to make this aligned to meet the needs of the small business community. There's a question, when will 2017 be open to apply? The round 3 is current right now. If you go to the website, I believe the round closes on November 10th. But again, there's going to be an overview webinar for the SBV program as a whole next week. There's another question, is it possible to receive a voucher for a technology that is not wholly driven by bioenergy but has a significant tie to it? Yes, I think it's a matter of how well and how concise your description of the technical problem is and what the lab capability fit is. How much data, but just to reiterate on that, I mean, we'll want to look at how aligned that technical solution is, or that technical problem is with the mission of this office, which I've outlined in very broad strokes earlier, as I mentioned, in greater specificity in the MYPP. So how much data should we include in the application? That the RFA, there is a template for the request for application, and that should address some of those questions. What stages of development are appropriate for the voucher? We're really looking at all stages of development, but the key here again is, how well described is the problem, and how well aligned is the lab capability to address that problem. Is the office interested in new pretreatment technologies? In a short, very terse answer is yes. Will the voucher ceiling, but again, and just to close the loop on that, again, we're looking at, what, the novelty and the merit of that pretreatment technology. Will the voucher ceiling remain at 50 to 300K? Yes. Is partnering between small businesses allowed? That's a great question, and that is probably a question best suited for next week. Do you know, or do you see or know if any of your voucher grants or contracts have an earned value management requirement or adherence to cost and schedule reporting? There is no requirement for EVM. Typically, that's something that you see for EVM is something that's typically applied for projects of greater scale and complexity than you would typically see for a small business voucher type of program. Again, we're looking at 50 to 300K type of projects, and typically EVM is applied to projects of greater dollar amounts and greater complexity. So in general, it's not a requirement, and it may not be the best type of system applied for this scope of funding. Is a specific feedstock included? No, there's no specific feedstock included. This office really primarily focuses on cellulosic feedstocks and algal feedstocks. There is most of our funding opportunity announcement solicitations have very specific definitions of what are specific or what are eligible feedstocks. In general, we look at non-food-based feedstocks. And actually, there's a more specific definition. Typically, we look at in the ESA. There is a nice definition of what are some of the feedstocks that we look into. But this office is really kind of also expanding and having a more concerted and greater emphasis on wet and aqueous feedstocks, waste streams. But in general, food-based feedstocks are typically excluded. Still going through the questions, number of good questions here. I don't see any more questions coming through. So will the voucher increase in 2017 or 2018? That's a question that's probably best suited for next week for the overview section. That's a question that's not clear in terms of the amount of the vouchers for this year. The amount that for each voucher would range between 50 and 300K. Perhaps this question is referring to the total amount of funding allocated. We have somewhere on the order of around 2 million. Up to, that's a ballpark, that's not a specific number, but that's about how much we have over FY17. There's a question of can we leverage the voucher program for California bioenergy solicitations? I don't know. That's a very specific question. Again, what the point of the voucher program is to address a specific small business need. We are looking for cost share in these programs, and that's something that will be covered next week. Coordinating, in terms of leveraging this voucher program with other programs, perhaps that's a question that's best suited for a general question that can be best applied next week. How should we estimate the amount of the voucher we are requesting? That's actually a very good question. We really want to make sure that the scope of the R&D request is commensurate with the amount of funding requested. So again, this is not meant to solve every single type of problem that you might have. Really, competitive proposals will be very specific and targeted and commensurate with the amount of funding. Is pre-coordination with the target lab encouraged? That is a very good question. I think this is actually one of the facts that are identified in the SBD.org website. This is the funding for this program goes to the national laboratories, and in some regard, they're going to be partners on this. So it's kind of a tricky question. I think that if you have any. It's important to know what the capabilities are at the lab, and you can certainly reach out to the labs themselves to see if what their capabilities are in line with what you think they are. And certainly, one of the things that we're trying to do is to make sure that the lab fit, that is, the problem is well aligned with the lab fit. So, if you have a problem and you propose, lab X, one of the things we want to do based on the problem definition is, realize, oh, well, maybe there's another lab that might be better suited for this specific problem, which is why it's really important to very, very clearly and concisely describe the specific problem that you have. So, there's a question of if we are proposing to upgrade biogas to chemicals or fuels, should we make sure to explain how it fits in with veto goals? Yes, and you should also describe, what's the specific problem or challenge that you have in that area. If you are a current, if you've been fortunate enough to be eligible, or if you've been fortunate enough to already obtain a voucher, you may apply. There's nothing that precludes past winners from applying again. We're trying to encourage as many new entities to the lab portfolio as much as possible, however. Will the webinar be available afterwards? Absolutely. We're going to try to post some of these questions we'll post some of these questions on this in this presentation and provide it for folks after this. We'll give it a few more minutes for additional questions, and then we'll close this webinar. Can we get details of the webinar next week regarding SBV? Again, it is on the website. If you go to www.sbv.org, there is a link to register for that webinar next week. And we will definitely share the slides we provided today. And it's important, if there are more specific questions, there There are points of contact on the sbv.org website that you can pose those questions to. Well, I want to thank you. I think at this point we're going to close down the webinar. I appreciate the robust responses and the great questions that we've received. We're really excited about this program. We're really looking forward to hearing some of the challenges and the concerns and issues, and seeing how lab capabilities at the DOE National Laboratories might be able to address specific challenges that you have. Again, this is a very competitive solicitation, so only a fraction of the applications that we receive will be able to go forward. But we wish you all the best. And again, if you have more general questions about the SBV program, please attend next week's webinar, which the details for that are on the sbv.org website. Thank you very much, and have a great day.